My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I was 34 the year I learned which family was real. It started with a phone call at 8:14 on a Tuesday night. My 9-year-old Lily was crashing in a hospital bed 90 minutes from home, and my 2 little boys were asleep in their room with nobody to watch them. So I did something I had never done in my whole life. I called my own mother and asked her for help. What she said back, I'll get to. But her answer wasn't even the worst thing I heard that week. My ex-husband's wife had a worse one. And what I did a year later, after the part one can still barely say out loud, none of them saw it coming. Some doors you spend years trying to open. Some you finally get to close. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we tell quiet stories about ordinary people, impossible choices, and the moment everything turns. If you have ever asked your own family for help and heard nothing back, this one is for you. Stay with me, because the part that matters most doesn't happen in that hospital. It happens at my front door a year later, when the people who said no came knocking. For most of my life, asking for help felt like confessing that the whole thing might collapse, so I never did. I raised 3 kids in a 2-bedroom rental and paid for it the only way I knew how, which was writing. Grant proposals, hospital newsletters, the careful kind of sentences that make strangers open their wallets for somebody else. I drafted everything in pencil first. On yellow legal pads I bought 12 to a pack at the dollar store. Lily used to steal them to draw horses in the margins. Connor, who was 6, thought the pads were boring. Mason, who was 4, just liked the sound of the pages turning. We didn't have much, but we had a rhythm, and the rhythm held us. School drop-off at 8, work until midnight, lunches packed the night before so nobody was late. I told myself I could carry anything if I planned for it hard enough. I kept a budget for groceries, a budget for gas, a budget for the dentist 3 months out. The one thing I never budgeted for was needing another adult in the room. Ryan had walked out 2 years earlier when Mason was still in diapers, and after that I just got more efficient, the way you do when there's no second pair of hands to catch the things you drop. People at school called me strong. For a long time, I thought that was a compliment. I see now it was also a way of telling me they expected nothing of themselves. There is a difference between carrying weight and carrying it alone, and I had spent 34 years refusing to learn it. That Tuesday night, the difference finally caught up with me. Lily was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia when she was 7. We did the long fight then, the one with the spinal taps and the steroid weeks where she screamed at me for cutting her toast wrong. Then she went into remission and gave us a whole year that felt almost normal. She turned 9 in March. In April, the blood work came back wrong again. The oncologist used the word relapse, and then she used softer words around it. But I had written enough medical copy to know that a relapse after the first remission is the harder road, the one with fewer turns left in it. They wanted her admitted for an intensive block of chemotherapy. The hospital with the pediatric oncology unit was 90 minutes away, straight up Route 12, and Lily needed a parent at the bedside, which meant me. Here is the part nobody tells you. I am a freelancer. Freelancers don't get the 12 weeks of job-protected leave that other parents can use, because that law only covers employees, and I employ myself. There was no paid time off. There was no bank of sick days. Every hour I sat beside Lily's bed was an hour I wasn't earning, and I had 2 clients quietly drifting toward other writers who answered their emails faster. So the math was brutal and simple. I had to be in 2 places 90 minutes apart, and I had only one body to do it with. Connor and Mason couldn't stay alone. And with me living at the hospital, my income had already dropped by half. Full-day care for 2 boys ran close to $400 a week, more than I was clearing now that the work had dried up. A good week before all this had covered rent, 3 kids, and a little set aside. There hadn't been a good week since April. I sat in the hospital parking garage that first night and counted the gas in dollars instead of gallons. Then I did the thing I had sworn I would never do. I started a list of people I could ask. There was exactly one name at the top. My mother's name is Carol. She had me when she was 26, and she has spent every year since reminding me what that cost her. She gave up nursing school. She told the family at every holiday that the pregnancy, which was me, had derailed her plans. She kept a ledger in her head of everything she had sacrificed, and the balance was always running against her children. I knew all this, which is why my hands were sweating when I dialed her at 9 that first night. I kept it short. Lily was back in the hospital. I needed help with the boys for a few weeks. Even just the mornings. Even just sometimes. There was a pause on the line that lasted long enough for me to hear my own pulse. Then she didn't say no. She did something worse. She started asking questions that were really accusations. How long would this go on? Whether I had thought any of this through when I decided to have 3 children I couldn't afford. Whether the writing was ever going to turn into a real job or whether I planned to lean on everyone else forever. I stood in the garage stairwell and felt myself getting smaller. I said, "Mom, she has leukemia." I said, "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for someone to be in the house while my babies sleep." And Carol took a breath I recognized from childhood, the one she takes right before she says the thing she's been holding behind her teeth. I gripped the railing and waited for it. I told myself, whatever it is, you can take it. You have always been able to take it. I was wrong about that, too. What she said was this. You chose this life. Don't make it ours. I didn't answer right away, because the sentence kept unfolding in my head, getting bigger the longer I held it. You chose this life, as if Lily's marrow had taken a vote. As if the boys had filled out an application. My mother kept talking the way she does when the silence frightens her, listing all the reasons it wasn't her job. She and my father were retired now. They had their routines, their garden club, their cruise deposit that was non-refundable. My father, Gary, was somewhere in the background of the call, and I could hear the television and the particular quality of his quiet, which is the quiet of a man who has decided that saying nothing is the same as staying clean. He didn't pick up the other phone. He didn't call me back later. In my whole childhood, I had watched him do this, fold himself smaller behind whatever my mother decided, and I had told myself he was gentle. That night, I understood gentle was just the word we used so we wouldn't have to use the real one. I said okay. I don't know why I said okay. Maybe because there was nothing left to negotiate, and a person can only stand in a stairwell begging for so long before the begging starts to cost more than the help would have been worth. I hung up. I drove home at midnight, 90 minutes down a dark Route 12, and let myself into a quiet house where my sons were sleeping safely, only because I had paid the neighbor's teenager $40 I didn't have. I sat on the floor of the hallway. I did not cry. I started making a different list. We had a family group text. My mother had named it the Lawsons years ago, with a little blue heart, back when she still wanted people to think we were close. By that week, it had become the place I watched my family choose other things. I sent a message into it the next morning, careful and small, the kind of message you write when you already know the answer but you owe it to yourself to ask out loud. Lily is back in the hospital for a few weeks of treatment. If anyone can take Connor and Mason even one afternoon, it would help more than I can say. I watched the little word appear under it. Delivered. Then, a few hours later, read. My mother had read it. My father had read it. My aunt in Ohio had read it. Nobody typed the 3 dancing dots. Nobody typed anything at all. What they did do that same afternoon was post in the other family chats and on their pages where I could still see them, because that is the particular torture of modern life. My mother liked a cousin's vacation photos. She left a comment on somebody's banana bread. 3 exclamation points, a recipe request. She was awake. She was reachable. She was choosing in real time, with her thumbs, where her attention would go. And it was not going to the message about her granddaughter's cancer. I stopped expecting a reply. Read receipts, I learned that week, are their own kind of answer. They just don't have the decency to say the words. I put the phone face down on the cafeteria table next to a coffee I couldn't taste. And I told myself there was still one more number I hadn't tried. The last name on my list was Ryan. He is Lily's father. He is Connor's father and Mason's father, too, in the technical way that biology insists on, even when nothing else backs it up. He had moved an hour in the other direction and married a woman named Amber the spring after our divorce, and they had a new baby and a new house with a porch I had only seen in the background of photos. I did not want to call him. I called him anyway, because Lily was his daughter, and there are some things you have to do even when your pride is screaming. Amber answered his phone. I heard the baby behind her and a kitchen and music. I said who I was even though she knew. I said Lily was in the hospital, that it was serious, that I needed help with the younger two so I could stay with her. There was a small laugh, the kind that isn't a laugh. Then Amber said the sentence I would carry for a year. Light as anything, like she was reading it off a cereal box. You're just a poor writer. Deal with it. The line went muffled, like she'd put a hand over it, and then Ryan came on for exactly 1 sentence. Now's not a good time for us, he said. Not a good time for them. I stood in a hospital hallway under a flickering light, holding a phone that had just told me twice in 2 days, by 2 different mouths, that my children's emergency was an inconvenience to the people who were supposed to love them most. I hung up. I went back into Lily's room. She was sleeping. I picked up a yellow legal pad and a pencil, and I started to plan. So I built a life out of duct tape and willpower, and for a while it held. Barely, but it held. The neighbor 2 doors down, Mrs. Calloway, was 78 and widowed and lonely in the specific way that makes a person generous. She took the boys most mornings and refused the money I tried to leave on her counter, so I started leaving it folded inside her newspaper instead. The hospital social worker, a calm man named Dennis, got us a room in the family lodging near the unit, the kind of place built for parents who can't afford a hotel and can't bear to drive home. I worked in the hallway outside Lily's room at 2 in the morning, laptop balanced on my knees, writing newsletters for a cardiology practice while a machine beeped behind the door. Dennis asked gently whether I had family who could spell me. I said they were busy. I didn't explain. There was a version of all this where I lied my way into more aid, exaggerated the numbers, left out the small freelance checks that still trickled in. And I thought about it, sitting there at 2 in the morning with my bank app open. But I have a thing about lying, even to systems that lie to me first. So I told the truth on every form and took only what the truth qualified me for. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. I sold the second car. I canceled the dentist. I learned which gas station off Route 12 was 4 cents cheaper and planned my errands around it like it mattered, because it did. And every night before I let myself sleep in the chair, I checked my phone one more time. The thread stayed silent. I stopped being surprised. The oncology floor has its own clock. The world outside runs on mornings and weekends, but in there the day turns on lab draws and vitals and the long hush between 3 and 5 in the morning, when the hallway empties and you can hear the building breathe. That's when I wrote. One night, a nurse stopped at the edge of the light. A woman around 50, with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair and a name tag that said Diane. She looked at the legal pad on my knees, at the pencil, at the cardiology newsletter I was pretending to care about. She didn't ask what I was doing. She just said, "You should eat something. There's pudding in the family fridge that nobody fights over." The vanilla. That was all. No advice, no questions about who was helping me, no head tilt of pity. I had grown allergic to the head tilt that week, the way people aim sympathy at you like it's a favor. Diane didn't do it. She came back 20 minutes later with 2 vanilla puddings and set one beside me without a word, and she ate the other standing up, watching the empty hall like we were 2 people on the same long shift. Inside the room, Lily was awake and bossy, even sick, directing a video call to her brothers. "Connor, hold the phone higher," she ordered. "Mason, that's not how you build it." She was the kind of big sister who ran the whole operation from a hospital bed with a port in her chest. I watched her tell Mason he was doing the blocks wrong, and I thought, that is a girl who has plans. I did not yet understand that Diane was going to matter. I thought she was just the nurse with the pudding. I was wrong about that, in the good direction, for once. I learned to be 2 mothers that month, neither of them whole. In the mornings I was the one who drove home down Route 12 to make pancakes and answer the questions, because Connor had started asking the questions. "When is Lily coming home?" He said, every single day, in the patient way of a child who believes adults have answers. "Is she coming home for my birthday? Can she still be my partner for the science fair?" I gave him the truth in pieces small enough to swallow, which is its own kind of lie, and I hated it. Mason didn't ask anything. He just got clingy, wrapping himself around my leg when I tried to leave for the hospital again. And one morning he bit me hard on the forearm and then sobbed like the world had ended, and I held him on the kitchen floor until we were both late for everything. In the afternoons I was the other mother, the bedside one, the one who read the same chapter of the horse book 4 times because Lily liked it and the steroids made her forget. I tried my mother one more time around the middle of that month. Not a call. I couldn't survive another call. Just a text to her directly, off the thread. "Mom, I'm drowning. Is there any way?" The dots appeared. My heart did something stupid and hopeful. Then the dots disappeared. No message came. And I realized, sitting in the parking garage with the engine off, that I had stopped checking the front door when I got home. Stopped half listening for a car in the driveway that might be my parents finally coming. You don't notice when hope leaves. You only notice later that the listening has gone quiet. That's its own kind of grief, and it arrived before the real one did. I want to stop here for a second, because I know some of you are in a hospital chair right now, or you were once. If you've ever slept folded in half beside someone you love while the people who should have shown up stayed home, leave one word below for me. Just one. I read them all, and I'll know what it means. And if you want to see how this turned, subscribe and stay with me. Now, back to it. The same week I sent my mother that text, the one she watched and didn't answer, I made the mistake of scrolling the family thread instead of closing the app. My mother had posted there after all. Not to me. A photo. The garden club. A dozen women in pastel cardigans around a long table, little finger sandwiches, a banner that said spring luncheon. My mother in the center, laughing, a glass of something pale in her hand. The caption said, "So blessed by my girls." 41 likes. I stared at it longer than I should have. There was a date stamp on it, small and gray at the bottom, and something about that date snagged in my mind and wouldn't let go, the way a splinter you can't see still tells you exactly where it is. I didn't chase it that night. I was too tired and Lily needed her 4 o'clock meds, and tired wins over splinters. But it stayed in me, that little gray date, waiting. I would chase it down soon enough. I wish I never had. It was a few days later that Lily spiked a fever in the night. The dangerous kind, the kind that empties a room of calm and fills it with people in gloves. Her temperature climbed, and the line on the monitor went jagged, and there was a stretch of 2 hours where the word they kept not saying sat in the room with us anyway. I needed someone, anyone, to be at the house, because if this turned into the worst version of itself, I could not leave Lily to drive home to the boys, and I could not bear for the boys to wake up to a stranger. I called my mother at 8:14 that night. It rang out. I sent a text. Nothing. By morning, Lily had stabilized, and I was hollow with the kind of relief that feels like grief's cousin. It was that morning, in the family lodging, with cold coffee and the boys safe because Mrs. Calloway had answered her phone on the first ring, that I finally chased the splinter. I opened the thread. I found the garden club photo. I checked the small gray date and time. The luncheon photo had been posted at 8:14 in the evening, the exact minute I had been standing over my daughter's bed, dialing my mother, listening to it ring and ring and ring. And below it, because I am a thorough person, and grief makes you thorough, I found Amber's public story from that same night. A wine bar, 2 glasses clinking, the caption date night with a little heart. Same hour. Same earth. My daughter on fire in a hospital bed, and the 2 women who could have come were holding up drinks for the camera. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I set the phone down on the bedspread very gently, like it was something that might break. And I made a decision I had been circling for weeks. I stopped asking. Not out of pride, out of arithmetic. You can't keep withdrawing from an account that has never once held $1 for you. After that morning, something in me went quiet and clear. I stopped spending my heart on the people who weren't coming, and started spending all of it on the one who was running out of time. I will tell you that those next weeks were not what you would expect. They were, in their strange way, almost happy. When you stop waiting for a rescue, you stop watching the door. And when you stop watching the door, you finally see what's in the room. What was in the room was Lily. We painted her nails in the bed, a different color on every finger because she couldn't decide, and she told me her opinions on everything, which were strong. We made the boys laugh on video calls until Mason fell off the couch. We read the horse book, and a second horse book, and started a third. One evening, Diane came off her shift, still in her scrubs, and left something on the windowsill of our lodging room. It was a casserole dish, glass with a blue lid, still warm, a note rubber banded to the top. From the floor staff, it said, though I would learn later there was no floor staff fund, that it was just Diane and her own kitchen and her own Sunday. We ate it at the little table, the 3 of us on a video screen and Lily and me with real forks, and it was the first warm food someone had made for me in longer than I wanted to count. I washed the dish that night and meant to return it. It sat by our door for weeks. I kept thinking I'd hand it back when things settled down. For 3 weeks, I almost let myself believe things would settle down. I didn't know we were running out of weeks. I didn't know the casserole dish would still be by my door when everything ended. The treatment that was supposed to buy her time stopped working the way they hoped. I won't walk you through the medicine. If you've been there, you don't need me to. And if you haven't, I'd rather you didn't have to picture it. What I'll tell you is how she was, because that's what I get to keep. She stayed bossy. She stayed funny. 2 days before the end, she made me promise, with a seriousness that flattened me, that I would not let Mason eat her candy, the secret stash in the shoebox under her bed, because Mason did not appreciate good candy and would just chew it wrong. I promised. I would have promised her the moon. She asked me strange, clear questions in those last days, the kind kids ask when they've gotten ahead of the adults. She asked if it would hurt. I told her the truth, that the doctors had medicine so it wouldn't. And she nodded like a manager approving a plan. And once, when she caught me writing on the yellow legal pad in the chair, she asked, "Mama, are you sad when you write about me?" I hadn't told her I was writing about her. I wasn't sure I had even told myself. But she'd seen me looking at her over the top of the page, and kids see everything. I said, sometimes. But mostly I'm glad, because it means I get to keep you on paper, too. She thought about that. Then write the good parts, she said. The horse book parts, not the hospital parts. Okay, baby, I said. The good parts. She closed her eyes. I sat with the pencil not moving in my hand, and I understood that she had just told me, without either of us saying it, that she knew. She was 9 years old. She knew, and she was managing me gently the way she'd managed her brothers from that bed. I let her. She died on a Sunday morning early, when the hallway was at its quietest and the building was breathing slow. I had been awake all night in the chair, and somewhere around 5 she got peaceful in a way that I knew was not the good kind of peaceful. And I climbed into the bed with her, careful of the lines, and held her the way I had held her the first morning of her life, when she was 8 pounds of furious red and I had no idea what I was doing. Diane was there. She had stayed past the end of her shift without making a thing of it, the way she did everything. And when the monitor's sound began to soften and stretch, she reached over and turned the volume down, so the last minutes belonged to us and not to the machine. I won't tell you the rest. It's mine. I'll tell you only that there was a moment after, when the room was very still and the sun was just starting to come gray through the blinds, and a young resident asked me kindly if there was anyone they could call for me, anyone who should be here. And I almost laughed, because the honest answer was no. The people you call are the people who come, and I had learned that month exactly who came and who watched the phone ring. I shook my head. Diane put her hand on my shoulder just for a second, then went to do the things that have to be done. I looked down at my hands, which had spent 9 years learning the exact weight of this child, and I picked the only true sentence I had out of the wreckage of that morning. I gave it all to her. Everything I had, I gave it to her. Then I folded the yellow legal pad closed and went out to find a phone, because I had 2 sons at home who did not know yet that their sister was gone. The days after a child dies don't move like days. They pull. I remember pieces, telling Connor, and the way his face did something I never want to see again. And Mason not understanding, and then understanding all at once 3 hours later in the bathtub, which is where 4-year-old grief apparently lives. I remember the casserole dish still by the door. And I remember the funeral, because that is where my family finally appeared. They came in dark clothes and louder grief than I had heard from them in years. My mother cried the hardest in the whole room. She gripped people's hands at the door and accepted their condolences as though she had spent that month at the bedside instead of at a garden club luncheon at 8:14 on the worst night of my life. I heard her tell a cousin, in the low, holy voice people use at funerals, "We did everything we could. Everything we could." I stood 10 feet away holding my son's hands, and I did not correct her, because you do not fight at your daughter's funeral, and because some part of me understood that the lie was the only way she could stand in that room at all. Amber sent a wreath. It was enormous white lilies, the most expensive arrangement in the room, with a ribbon that said "Beloved Lily" in gold. She and Ryan did not come. The wreath came. I had it moved to the back. My father stood by the wall the whole time, not talking to anyone, his eyes wet, his hands useless at his sides. And for 1 second, our eyes met across the room. He looked away first. Their presence at that funeral was colder than their absence had ever been. At least the absence had been honest. I'm going to be honest with you about the week after the funeral, because the title of this video promised you honesty, and I won't cheat you. There was a night, maybe 4 or 5 days after we buried her, when I sat at the kitchen table after the boys were asleep, and I did not want the morning to come. I won't dwell on it. People who have stood in that particular dark know exactly where I'm pointing, and people who haven't need a map. I'll just say that the bottom of grief is a real place, and I was at it, and the world had gone very small and very quiet and very tempting in its quiet. What pulled me back was a sound. The house was silent the way houses are at 2 in the morning. And into that silence came the sound of my son's breathing in the next room. Connor's heavier breaths and Mason's quick little ones, out of sync the way they always slept. I sat there and I listened to them breathe. 2 boys who had already lost their sister, who had a father who said now's not a good time, and grandparents who watched the phone ring. If they lost me too, they would have no one. I had spent a month learning that the only person who reliably showed up for my children was me. So I decided to keep showing up. Not because I felt strong, but because they were breathing, and I was their mother. 1 week after Lily died, I heard a knock at the front door. I almost didn't answer it. I was not fit for company, and I assumed it was a neighbor with another lasagna, because grief in our town arrives in foil pans. But the knock came again. Patient. Not pushy. And something made me get up. It was Diane. Off shift, in regular clothes, which I had never seen. Jeans and a cardigan that made her look like somebody's actual aunt instead of the woman who had turned down a monitor so I could say goodbye in peace. In her hands she had 2 things. The first was a casserole dish, glass with a blue lid, the same shape as the one still sitting unwashed by my door, because of course she had made more than one. The second was a notebook. Plain black cover, the cheap kind from the drugstore, brand new, the price sticker still on the corner. She didn't come in. She stood on the step and said, "I know it's not my place." I said it was, that she was about the only person whose place it was. And she held out the notebook and said the thing that turned my whole life. "You kept writing at 3 in the morning for a reason," she said. "Even when you were too tired to see straight, you wrote. So write it down. Even the parts you can't say out loud, especially those." I took the notebook. I didn't promise her anything. I wasn't capable of promises that week. But I held that cheap black notebook in both hands on my own front step, the same step where a year later a very different group of people would stand knocking, and something in my chest that had been clenched for a month loosened by exactly 1 notch. I didn't write that night. I wrote the next morning, before the boys woke up, in pencil on a yellow legal pad, because some habits are older than grief. The first sentence I wrote was true, and it was small, and it was about the toast. How she screamed at me at 7 years old, on steroids, for cutting her toast into squares when she had clearly, obviously wanted triangles. I wrote it because it was the kind of memory that doesn't make it into the speeches, the kind that's too ordinary and too alive to fake. Once I had one true sentence, I could find the next one. I wrote the horse book. I wrote the nail polish, every color on every finger. I wrote the way she ran her brothers' lives from a hospital bed. And yes, I wrote the hospital parts, too, the ones she told me to leave out, because she was 9 and she was wrong about that, and because the only way I could carry them was to set them down on paper. I wrote about the phone ringing at 8:14. I wrote the garden club photo and the wine bar and the date. I wrote, "You're just a poor writer. Deal with it," exactly as Amber had said it, because writing it down was the first time I'd been able to look at it without flinching. I became two people again, but a different two this time. In the day, I was a mother making pancakes, packing science fair supplies, learning how to be the only parent of 2 boys instead of 3 kids. At night, I was the woman with the pencil. I didn't write to publish. I want to be clear about that, because of how this ends. I wrote to breathe. The pages stacked up on the kitchen table, yellow and gray with pencil, and slowly, without my permission, they started to add up to something that had a shape. If you've lost someone and the words feel stuck behind your teeth, let me tell you what Diane told me. Write one true sentence. Not for anyone, not for a book, not for anybody's approval. Just one sentence that's true. Even if it's about toast. It saved my life, and I don't say that lightly. If anything here is reaching you tonight, hit subscribe, because the part where everything turns is coming up. A few weeks into the writing, Diane mentioned a bereavement group that met at the public library on Thursday nights, in the back room with the bad fluorescent light and the good coffee. I almost didn't go. I went because she offered to sit with the boys, and because a person who turns down a monitor for you has earned a yes. The group was 8 people and a facilitator and a box of tissues nobody touched, because grief past a certain depth runs dry. They asked if anyone wanted to read. I had a page in my bag. I didn't plan to, but my hand went in and pulled it out, and I read them the toast, the squares, and the triangles, and the screaming. And when I looked up, the room was completely still. A woman across the circle, older than me, who had lost a son, reached over and put her hand on my wrist and didn't say anything at all. That was the first time my truth landed in front of strangers, and they bore witness to it instead of explaining it away. Nobody told me I'd chosen this life. Nobody told me to deal with it. They just listened. And the listening was something I could stand on. The woman who put her hand on my wrist was named Patricia. It turned out that before she retired, she had been an editor, the real kind, the kind who had spent 30 years turning other people's pain into pages people could hold. She asked carefully, over bad library coffee, whether there was more than that one page. I told her there was a kitchen table full. She asked if she could read it. I almost said no, because the pages were mine and Lily's and nobody else's. But Patricia had lost a son, so I trusted her with it the way you can only trust someone who has stood in the same fire. She read it over 2 weeks. Then she told me plainly, no flattery, that it was a book, and that it deserved to be one, and that she knew an editor at a small press who should see it. I want to be honest about what happened next, because the internet loves a story where the right person reads your manuscript on a Tuesday and you're rich by Friday. That is not what happened. The first editor passed. So did the second. The third said the writing was strong but the subject was hard to sell, which is a sentence I have decided to forgive. It took almost a year and a stack of polite rejections before a small press in the Midwest said yes. The advance was modest. I cried over it anyway. The money wasn't the reason. Someone with no reason to be kind had read the worst year of my life and decided the world should get to read it, too. We titled it from something Lily said near the end, half asleep, about how the horses in her book ran out of a burning barn and were more beautiful after, with the soot still on them. From Ashes, she had named it. She just didn't know. From Ashes came out on a Tuesday in the spring, almost exactly a year after Lily died. For 2 weeks, it did what small press books usually do, which is almost nothing. Then a woman with a large online following, a mother who had lost a child of her own, read it and posted about it, and something broke open. It moved the way grief moves when it finally finds words for itself. Hand to hand, mother to mother, through the exact group chats and online circles where women my age live their real lives. It hit a bestseller list, then another. Bookstores reordered it. I started getting letters, hundreds of them, from women who had slept in hospital chairs while their families stayed home, who had been told to deal with it, who had carried the unbearable alone and thought they were the only ones. They were not the only ones. I was not the only one. That was the whole point. And it was landing. Here is the part that matters for this story. I had not changed a single name in that book, except Lily's, which I kept because she earned it. I told the truth about the phone ringing at 8:14. I told the truth about the garden club and the wine bar. And on page 204, in black ink, anyone who bought the book could read the exact words my ex-husband's wife said to me the week my daughter was dying. "You're just a poor writer. Deal with it." A national reviewer pulled that line for the headline of her review. It went everywhere. Amber had said it once in a kitchen, thinking no one would ever hear. Now it was being read aloud at book clubs in 40 states. I never raised my voice. I never sent a single angry text. I just wrote down what was true and let a few 100,000 strangers be my witnesses. The family thread had been silent for over a year. The little group my mother had named the Lawsons, with its blue heart, had gone quiet the day Lily was buried and stayed that way, which suited me fine. I had moved it to the bottom of my messages and stopped looking. So I noticed when it lit up. The book had been out about a month, and the bestseller lists had done their work, and apparently a reporter from the regional paper had called my mother for comment, because that is how she found out her granddaughter's death was now a story strangers were reading. Suddenly the thread had a pulse. My mother posted a photo of the book cover. "So proud of my daughter," she wrote, with a red heart, the same red heart she'd put on a banana bread recipe the week I was begging her for help. So proud. As if pride were a thing you could mail in late and have it still count. Then, and this is the part that made me put the phone down and walk into the yard for a minute, Amber left a public review. 5 stars. Always knew she had it in her. The review called its author brave and talented, apparently without irony, or without having read past the cover. I read it 3 times to make sure it was real. Not one of those messages, not my mother's pride, not Amber's 5 stars, not a single word in that suddenly chatty thread, mentioned Lily's name. They had found the spotlight. They had not found the child. I should have known what was coming next. A week later, it knocked. We had a different house by then, nothing grand, a small place at the end of a quiet street, but it had a yard and 3 bedrooms and a porch. And the porch is where this part happens, because life has a sense of symmetry even when you'd rather it didn't. It was a Saturday afternoon in early summer. The boys were in the yard, and there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, they were all standing on my porch. My mother in her good coat, my father behind her with his hands in his pockets, and beside them Ryan and Amber, who I had not seen in person since before the divorce, dressed up like people who had rehearsed. My mother was holding flowers, store-bought, the cellophane still crackling. For one strange second, I just looked at them. This delegation of people who had each, in their own way, told me no when no could have killed me. The last time someone stood on a step holding something out to me, it had been Diane with a notebook. This was the photographic negative of that moment. My mother spoke first. Her eyes were already wet, professionally wet, the tears she could summon on cue. "Fiona," she said, "we've all been doing a lot of thinking. We want to make things right. We're family. We're still family." Behind her, my father nodded at the porch boards. Amber arranged her face into something warm. Ryan looked at the boys in the yard, his boys, who he had not asked to see in over a year, like a man checking that an investment had held its value. And I stood in my own doorway, in the house my own words had bought, and I understood that the people who had told me to deal with my life alone had come back the moment that life turned out to be worth attaching themselves to. I did not invite them in. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me so the boys couldn't hear. What followed was the strangest sales pitch I have ever heard, and I have written copy for a living. My mother went first, with the family material. Blood is blood. Lily would have wanted us together. She used my dead daughter as a closing argument, and I let her keep talking, because people tell you exactly who they are if you give them enough quiet. Then it got specific, the way these things always do. There was mention of the book, of how nice it would be if the next one had some of the good family memories in it, the holidays, as if there had been good holidays. There was a soft suggestion from Ryan that with everything going so well for me now, surely we could be reasonable about helping each other out between family. There it was. The ask. The same word, help, that I had spoken into a stairwell at 9 in the evening a lifetime ago, now coming back at me from the people who had refused it. Except now there was money in the room, so suddenly help was a thing families did for one another. And then Ryan said the thing that ended the conversation, though he didn't know it. He said he'd been thinking he should get to see Connor and Mason regularly, that it wasn't right for a father to be cut off. And Amber, beside him, went very still, and a look passed between them that I recognized, because I had heard its shape a year before. "Now's not a good time for us," he'd said then. A whole year of silence, and the first time it cracked, he flinched toward his wife instead of his sons. I didn't have proof of how the wall got built, and I found I didn't need it. Whatever the arrangement between them was, the man had let himself be kept from his own living children for a year, and only wanted back in now that their mother was somebody. The injustice of that, aimed at my sons, was the one thing in the whole performance that moved me. Amber must have felt the temperature change, because she stepped forward with her warmest smile and said, "Sarah, listen. We never meant that whole poor writer thing. That was a hard day for everyone. We never meant it." I almost admired the nerve. Here is the thing I had learned, the thing the whole terrible year had taught me, the thing I had put on page after page. You do not have to match someone's volume to win. I did not yell. The angrier and more frightened they got, the quieter I went, because I no longer needed anything from any of them. And a person who needs nothing from you is the one person you cannot control. I said evenly that I appreciated them coming, and that the answer was no. No to the next book. No to the holidays. No to the help between family. My mother's professional tears dried up fast when they weren't working, and the real thing underneath came out, which was rage. After everything I sacrificed for you, she said, her voice climbing. You're going to stand here and abandon your own mother? Abandon. The woman who watched my texts go unanswered for a month was accusing me of abandonment on my own porch. Amber started in too, talking fast about how unfair I was being, how I was punishing a baby, her baby, for grown-up problems, how I had put their private business in a book to humiliate them. The two of them got louder and louder, talking over each other, and I just stood there, calm, with my back to my own front door, letting them show me on a Saturday afternoon exactly what they had shown me on the phone a year before. Ryan said nothing. Ryan always says nothing. And my father, my quiet father, who had spent his whole life folding himself smaller behind whatever my mother decided, did something he had never done. He looked up from the porch boards. He looked right at me, and his eyes were wet. And this time he didn't look away first. Sarah, he said. His voice cracked on my name. I should have. And then he stopped. The whole sentence just stopped, hanging there in the summer air. I should have, with the rest of it too heavy for him to lift after 63 years of practice at lifting nothing. For 1 second I saw the whole sad shape of him, a man who knew, who had always known, and had chosen silence so many times that the silence had become the only language he had left. Then my mother said his name, sharp, Gary, and he closed his mouth and stepped back to her side. He chose her again. He would always choose her. That was the saddest thing on the porch. And I let it be sad, and it changed nothing. When they had worn themselves out, when the yelling had nowhere left to go, the porch got quiet, and the quiet belonged to me, because I was the only one in it who wasn't afraid. I looked at my mother and said the thing I had carried since the morning Lily died, the only true sentence I'd been able to find that day. I gave it all to her. I gave my daughter everything I had, every hour and every dollar and every ounce of myself, while the 4 of you decided it wasn't your job. So there's nothing left over here for any of you. I'm not keeping it from you out of spite. There just isn't any. I gave it all to her. Then I turned to my mother and gave her back her own words, the ones that had echoed in my head for a year, the ones I'd written on page 1. You told me I chose this life, I said. Don't make it yours. You were right about one thing. I did choose it. I chose these boys and I chose their sister and I chose to show up. So here's the difference between us. I chose this life, and I won't make it yours. My mother opened her mouth and found nothing in it. And last, I turned to Amber, who was still working on her face, still trying to find the smile that would crack me open. And I almost felt sorry for her, standing on my porch, insisting she never meant a thing she'd built her whole comfortable year on. You want to know what I really think? I told her, and she leaned in, hungry for it. I think you can read it, same as everyone else. It's in the book. Page 204. Then I opened my front door, stepped back inside my house, and closed it gently. No slam, because a slam is something you do when you still have something to prove. And I didn't. Not anymore. Through the door, I could hear my mother's voice rise again, then fade as my father, I think, finally steered her down the steps. In the yard, through the window, Connor was pushing Mason on a swing we'd hung from the one good tree, and neither of them had heard a word of it. And that was the only thing on earth I cared about protecting. I had protected it. I went out the back door to go push my sons. They didn't come back. There were a few messages on the thread for a while, my mother cycling through wounded and furious and wounded again, and then even that went quiet. I didn't block the number and I didn't delete the group. I just turned the notifications off. There's a difference between slamming a door and quietly stepping away from one, and I'd learned to tell them apart. Life got smaller and warmer after that, which is the only direction I ever wanted it to go. The royalties from Ashes did something I had never had in my adult life, which was give me room to breathe. Not yachts. Room. I put money into accounts with the boys' names on them, so that no child of mine would ever again be told there wasn't enough. I kept the small house with the good tree. I kept writing, mornings now instead of 3 in the morning, still in pencil, still on yellow legal pads, because some things you don't fix once they're working. Diane became something I don't have a tidy word for. She comes for Sunday dinner most weeks. Connor calls her by her first name, and Mason calls her Grandma Diane, which she allows, and which the first time I heard it made me leave the room so they wouldn't see my face. And one Sunday, a little over a year after the porch, I finally did the thing I'd been meaning to do since the family lodging. I took the casserole dish, the glass one with the blue lid, the one that had sat by one door and then another through the whole worst stretch of my life, and I washed it until it shone, and I filled it with my own cooking, and I gave it back to Diane across a table in a kitchen with good light and 3 places set and a 4th we keep anyway, for the girl who named the book. From the floor staff, I told her, handing it over, and Diane laughed, the real kind, because we both knew there had never been any floor staff. There had just been her. There had just, in the end, been the people who showed up. That's who got to sit at my table. The dish goes back and forth between us now. Full both directions. That's what family turned out to be. A warm dish that keeps coming back. I used to think family was the people who shared your blood. But I buried that idea the same year I buried my daughter. And here is what I believe instead. Family is the people who show up at 3 in the morning when you have nothing to offer them. And the ones who only knock when it has finally gotten easy don't get to come in. That's my story. One daughter I'd give anything to hold again. One nurse who knocked when I had nothing left. And 2 boys still here because one quiet night they were breathing in the next room. If someone in your life keeps showing up, tell them today, before you learn the hard way who would. If this story stayed with you, share it, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.